Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best tech leaders in the world to help you scale from 2 million ARR to 100 million ARR. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Adrian Blair, the CEO of Receipt Bank, also former COO at Just Eat. Adrian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's get to know more about yourself and how did you end at Receipt Bank?
Yeah, indeed. So I've worked in the tech industry, I guess, for the best part of 20 years. I started out in the early days of internet search in the late 1990s with a company called Ask Jeeves, which some of your listeners may remember. So I was leading their business development team in the UK around the millennium, right after the dot-com bubble burst. I joined Ask Jeeves. I stayed there for a couple of years, and we grew the business quite healthily, but we could also see that we were being outcompeted by Google. And the big lesson for me from that was that in the technology industry, technology is in fact the most important thing. The clue is in the name. And our mistake, I think, at Just Eat was we were a marketing-led company, so we were investing heavily in brand and in TV, and we had a competitor that did no marketing but had amazing technology, and they were gaining share on us every month. So I was there for a couple of years. I left because I could see the writing on the wall. I could see that Google were overtaking us. I moved to the US, did an MBA at Harvard, and after a couple of years doing that, the only place I really wanted to work was Google, because I was really fascinated by what they'd done to us back at Ask. So I joined Google in California in 2004 and stayed there for the next 6 years. And that was definitely the most formative period of my professional life, really learning from the way Larry and Sergey were doing things at Google, a completely different way of running a business to what we'd been taught in the course of my MBA. So I was there for 6 years. I'm a passionate pianist, I'm a musician, so was very intrigued by Spotify and music streaming. And, obviously growing up at Google, I really understood the cloud and the potential for everything ultimately to be in the cloud. So when I saw this cloud music company, I thought, wow, this is what I ought to be doing. So I joined Spotify in 2010. And I'd only been there a very short time when I got a call about a company called Just Eat. And I was one of the few people at the time who had heard of Just Eat, because I'm a passionate takeaway eater. And I was already a Just Eat customer in 2010, because I guess I'm an early adopter. So I took the call, I met the CEO, and we got on extremely well. And I thought, wow, this is actually a company with amazing potential, because it has a great product in a huge market, and obviously there's a sort of inevitability to takeaway food ordering moving from the telephone to digital channels. And in principle, you should be able to build a huge company off the back of that. So that's what led me to move and to leave Spotify very early to join Just Eat as Chief Operating Officer at the beginning of 2011. And that's where I stayed for the next 7 years. So 3 years pre-IPO. We went public in 2014 on the London Stock Exchange. And then I stayed for 4 years post-IPO. And we were promoted to the FTSE 100 in December 2017. So after leaving Just Eat, which I did, I guess, at the end of April 2018, I was looking for another company with that kind of potential to really drive change from some old inefficient way of doing things to something much more modern using the cloud. There aren't actually that many things in the world of consumers that haven't been done yet. But if you look at the world of small businesses, there's still massive inefficiencies. And that's what led me to Receipt Bank and to think, actually, this is an amazing product in a huge market, and it should be able to conquer the world. So that's obviously what I'm here to do.
Andrew, let us know a little bit more about what is Receipt Bank.
Yeah, so Receipt Bank is a company that transforms productivity for small businesses and their advisors, typically accountants and bookkeepers. So we make the bookkeeper and the accountant far more powerful and able to do far more for their clients. And by doing so, we help small businesses to focus on what they're great at, rather than having to spend a lot of time on their financials, and give them a better chance of growing and being successful, instead of going bankrupt, as far too many small businesses actually do. The reason this resonates so much with me is I remember back to my time at Just Eat, a large proportion of our restaurants every month were going bankrupt, were going out of business. And these were small entrepreneurs who were very good at what they do, which is cooking food, and very bad at anything to do with money. So we think, Receipt Bank, what small businesses need is professional help, but they need to get the best out of a professional advisor in a way that is really efficient and doesn't take a lot of their time in doing manual tasks. So we really transform productivity for the small business and for their advisors, and in doing so, have a big impact on the economy. I was talking to one of our customers yesterday, who uses Receipt Bank with all of her clients, and she was just giving me really tangible examples of where she does her job so much better, because in the old days she was doing lots of manual work, and now she's able to focus on actually high value adding activities. So she's giving her clients advice on how to save money. She's giving them advice on cash flow and how to make sure they still trade. She's giving her clients advice on accounts receivables and how to get paid more quickly. And she's charging actually more money for her services than she was able to in the past, because she's doing these value adding activities. And basically what she was saying was, look, in the past, she would spend most of her time chasing her clients for information and typing all the information in after it had come through. So she was doing data entry, and nagging was essentially what her life involved. Now she's essentially using Receipt Bank to do all of that. So Receipt Bank is in the hands of all their clients. They've got our app on their phone. All the information that she needs is being submitted by her clients in real time. So all of that nagging has gone away. The information is just coming through. We use machine learning to process the data. So we do it with 98% accuracy. So there's no more manual data entry. And we use machine learning to understand the information. So it's not just the actual characters on a invoice or whatever, it's the actual meaning of the information. What is it that the information conveys? We're using machine learning to do that as well. So all the bits of her life that she didn't like are being taken care of by Receipt Bank and automated. And what she's actually doing all day is the stuff that's more interesting, that human beings are better at than machines. And the result is that these small businesses she works with are more successful and less likely to go out of business. So that's essentially the kind of thing that we want to do for every small business on the planet. We work with 330,000 small businesses today, so we've already got quite widespread distribution. But we need to make that millions, because there are still far too many businesses out there who are not getting the benefit of Receipt Bank.
Absolutely. And in terms of the stage of growth for the CEOs, founders, executives that are listening to the podcast, where are you now in terms of head count, funding rounds? What are the next steps as well?
We're around 450 people globally. So our biggest market is the UK, but it's only about a third of our business. So we're already very international. Our second biggest market is Australia. Our third is the US, and we're also in Canada, France and South Africa. We have a big engineering team in Bulgaria. We have some outsourced operations in India. So we are quite a global bunch of people already, around 450. In terms of funding rounds, we are in the process of completing our Series C at the moment. And there'll be, I hope, something to announce on that within the next few weeks. So that's kind of where things are at the moment. But what we've really got to do as a company now is cross that chasm into the sort of 100 million plus ARR. So we're no longer down in the single digits. We're a decent sized business. But we've got to get to the 100 million plus and then go well beyond. And if I think back to my Just Eat experience, Just Eat
100 million plus MRR. What did you mean
Well,
with the 100?
we'll start with 100 million plus ARR, and we'll ultimately get to 100 million plus MRR. I hope, but that might take a little longer. But if I think back to my Just Eat experience, when I joined Just Eat, we were slightly smaller than Receipt Bank is today, and if I think of that path from Receipt Bank, Just Eat when I joined was doing around 25 million pounds of revenue per year. If I think of what it took to get from 25 to over 100, it was an enormous amount of work. I mean, it was really quite a lot of new leaders in the business, a lot of processes that needed to be reinvented.
How many years did you need to go from the 25 to the 100?
It took us about 2.5 years. So yeah. I mean, and we became a public company 3 years after I joined. And then we took that, but by the time I left in 2018, we were doing something like 760 million pounds a year of revenue. So we took it well beyond the 100. But I know from that experience, it's really a non-trivial exercise to go from sort of tens of millions to hundreds of millions. It requires huge amount of work, a lot of change inside the company. And that's frankly why most organizations don't achieve it. But that's what I'm in the process of doing here at Receipt Bank is, I've brought on board quite recently some leaders who've got experience of those kinds of scaling journeys. And we're really in that process now of driving the change and the growth and the ambition necessary to get into the hundreds of millions.
Yeah, you have been doing this before, what you are now trying to do at Receipt Bank, but on the COO seat and now in the CEO seat. What are the main differences between being on the COO seat, scaling up a company, and now being in the CEO seat?
Yeah, so there's a couple of big ones. I would say, your stakeholders and your time horizon are two of the key things. So, as COO, stakeholder management isn't really such a big issue. It's very clear what it is that you need to do. You need to drive performance and drive growth. And you've got one boss, and you've got who's the CEO, and you've got a team of people that you need to get together and really galvanize and make sure are performing really, really strongly. So your stakeholder group is pretty simple, and your time horizon as COO, it should be longer than the next quarter. You shouldn't just be thinking about the next 3 months of growth, but you should probably be thinking in a sort of 12-month plus time horizon. But you're thinking very much in terms of months, quarters, maybe a year, maybe a bit more than a year. But you're thinking those sorts of time horizons. As CEO, those things completely change. So your stakeholder group becomes rather different. You've got a board of directors who are all, in some sense, your boss. You need to understand the complexities of that and the different agendas around your board table. You need to develop the overall vision for the company and make sure that you're communicating that in a compelling way to both up, down, and outside the company. And your time horizon is just inherently longer. You need to be thinking 3+ years down the line, what else is going on around our company, and how is our company going to play into the world as it might look in let's say 3+ years time. So the time horizon is different, the stakeholder group's different. I think that there's also more of an external focus as CEO. I certainly felt it Just Eat as COO. I was, if anything, too internally focused. I wasn't going to a lot of events. I wasn't meeting a lot of people from other companies because my whole life was just consumed by the challenges of getting thousands of people across many different countries performing really well and doing a great job, which just takes a lot of hours in the day. As CEO, I think you need to be more externally focused than that, and meeting peers from other industries, getting to know people in companies around you in the ecosystem. So there is more of an external bent when you're in the number one position.
Got it. During the show, we always discuss three main pillars of scaling up a business. The first one is, of course, the team and the way you structure the leadership team. Yeah. The second one is much more related with focus and strategy. And the third one, much more related with execution and rhythms that are really valuable for you as a CEO now. And starting for the first one, and it is very underestimated the importance of working on the next version of the leadership team, like what we do with fundraising, starting to build relationships with our potential investors down the line. So when we get to that moment, we already know them, we already trust them, they trust us, and they understand, and we understand if they can also add value to our business scaling up. So what is your approach to kind of always working on the next version of a leadership team? Are you a person that believes that your leadership team needs to change a lot from 5 million to 10 million ARR, from 10 to 20, 20 to 50, or do you prefer to have the majority of the members of the leadership team to stay with you?
I think it's very important to have a stable leadership group. I think it really destabilizes people, and you lose a lot of institutional learning if you've got leaders who are coming and going. So, one of the real foundations of our success at Just Eat was the stability of the leadership team. I mean, in my whole time of 7 years, I had almost zero regretted departures of senior commercial people in that time. It was really an amazingly cohesive, stable group. And in fact, even today, the leaders of the different countries, the country general managers, are largely the same group that I left in 2018. So we'd raised less capital than other people had in our sector. We didn't have the most advanced technology in our sector, but we did have that amazing cohesive leadership group with a great culture that was a big ingredient of our success. So I'm very much a believer that you get a great group of people together, you become very close, and you grow together. And of course, in doing so, your domain knowledge expands massively over time. You really become experts on your company, your industry, and what you're doing in a way that it's very hard to just then substitute one of those people from outside. So having said that, it's incredibly important, if your ambition is to keep the group of people together and keep it tight as you scale from the sort of tens of millions to hundreds of millions, it's incredibly important that you've got a group of people who are able to go on that journey and who have what it takes to scale and go a lot further. And that's why, as CEO, and thinking about your leadership team, you need to be thinking not how have they done over the last couple of years, but how are they positioned for the next 3+ year growth journey that we need to go on. So one of the things I've done at Receipt Bank since coming in is brought in some leaders on the commercial side who have that kind of experience. So I brought in a new CFO, Christine Mullin, a new Chief Revenue Officer, Al Newman, a new Chief Marketing Officer, Darryl Bowman. So I brought in 3 very experienced people with a track record of going on these kinds of scaling journeys, who are part of that tight, cohesive group that's going to take us to being a far bigger organization.
That's exciting.
And it's one of the things, if I think back to Google, one of the amazing things that Larry and Sergey did at Google is they managed to find people very, very early on who, literally when Google was like a couple of dozen people, who had what it took to run multi-billion-dollar companies. I think Susan Wojcicki, who's the CEO of YouTube, obviously, massive multi-billion enterprise, was one of those very, very, very early employees. And the same is true for some of the people on the engineering side. I mean, it's really one of the amazing things that the guys did at Google.
Right. We all know that one of the difficult and tough parts of scaling up is that the business if we have the positive problem, and we all expect to have this problem, is that the market goes quicker than the company, and the company is growing quicker than the people who are leading the company. So how do you ensure that we don't become the growth bottleneck, so that we as a CEO,
the people themselves don't
absolutely
become the growth bottleneck.
And let's go for it. We know that we are in an outlier industry of the VC funds. One of the 10 portfolio companies will be the home run, which means that they will have on the other 9 or 8, they will try to find where is the market, where is revenue, how do we grow. Another part of the market, that's where we prefer to be, is how the market is demanding so much from us, and things are going so quick that we can dive by implosion instead by starvation by implosion instead of starvation. So which is a very
there are so many ways to die.
So how do you ensure that you keep evolving quickly than the business, and you did it at Just Eat, and to ensure that the same happens with your leadership team? I think you also answered to that in the leadership team.
I think part of it is just getting people who
have been there,
who love that kind of uncapped growth opportunity. I think it's one of the key differences between managers and leaders is, managers are all about continuity and no surprises and making the status quo work a bit better. Leaders are about change and driving change, right, and having a vision of something different and getting to that different stage as soon as possible. So I think if you build a team of real leaders, they seize these opportunities and see an industry that's changing very fast and see the potential of technology, and are really impatient in a hurry to get there. So I think if you get the right senior leadership team, you end up getting ahead of that. You are sort of creating the growth, creating the opportunities, rather than feeling like you're somehow the victim of them.
Got it. Perfect. And let's jump for the second topic, which is much more related with focus. We all know that strategy is a subtraction exercise. It's about doubling down and doing few things.
Indeed.
And it's very tempting when we are kind of trying to double or triple the business to add new avenues of growth, more complexity, more geos, more products, more segments. So how do you as a CEO assure that the team is really focused on what needs to get achieved in the quarter and how it fits the next year, the next 3 years, as you were saying, or even the milestones of the next funding rounds?
I think there's a couple of things, and these are definitely lessons that I learned very strongly at Google. So one thing is quarterly OKRs, which I think most tech companies use these days, but really at Google, that's sort of in your blood. It's the first thing I've done. The first thing I did at Just Eat was introduce quarterly OKRs, right, and I did the same again here at Receipt Bank, because it's just one of those things. Like if you come in and people don't have clear quarterly goals, you just wonder, what are they doing all day? What's going on? So that's just one of those basics that I can't really live without. So OKRs are helpful in giving everybody a tangible sense of what's expected of them and what they are looking to achieve in a quarter. It also, the main reason I like OKRs is because they force the right conversation between everybody and their manager about what priorities should actually look like. So, everyone in the company should be having a conversation with their manager saying, what are the most important things that I need to change or achieve in the next few months? And OKRs are a way of ensuring that those conversations happen. They're also a great way, of course, of alignment across teams. So, I don't see OKRs as sort of stick to beat people with if they're not achieving their OKRs. It's about provoking those conversations and making sure that teams are aligned so that, the engineering team's priorities support the sales team's priorities and the marketing team's priorities, and they're all internally consistent. So OKRs are an important tool for achieving that. But I think the other more long-term thing is, as a company, you need to be really clear on what your distinctive strengths are. So at Google, and then double down on those and invest in those. So in Google, we were always very clear it was search and ads. So 70% of all our investment had to go into search and ads, and no one would ever come close to us at search and ads. We might not be the best at some other things, like marketing, for example. Certainly in the early days was an area where Google was weak and just didn't really think very much about we But as long as we were the best at search and ads, it kind of didn't matter. Per my Ask Jeeves example, where we got beaten by the company that was focused on technology, even though we were very good at marketing. So I think it's important in every company to have a clear sense of what you're great at and make sure that you remain great at that. And then it's a question of how much resources there left over for other things that are optional. But staying great at what you're great at is the non-optional thing that you have to invest in first. So if I think of Receipt Bank, there's a couple of things that we are just streets ahead of everybody else on. One is machine learning powered data extraction. So using artificial intelligence to understand financial information and what it means. We're great at that. We need to keep investing in that and become better and better. So, just in the last few months, we've added several machine learning engineers. We managed to attract some amazing machine learning talent to ensure that we remain best in class in terms of data extraction. The other area where we're world class is the workflows of our customers. So accountants and bookkeepers, what are all the things that they're spending time on? Let's use automation to make those things far more efficient. And we've, I think, understood that problem and understood the customer needs in more depth than anybody else. So those are the areas that are equivalent to search and ads, where we need to really double down and make sure that we are absolutely world class at those things. And then everything else is kind of is more discretionary, I guess.
It's very interesting. I was listening to you, and I think this is one of the components that the majority of scale-ups and of companies in general, but we are discussing scale-ups, miss in their strategic planning exercises, which is really talking about strategy before moving to the OKRs and going from the future to the present. I was thinking one of the tools that we use implementing the scaling up methodology is the 7 strata, where we go, what are the words that you want, which is exactly what you were saying about search and ads and machine learning adapted to the finance world in the case of Receipt Bank. Second part is, what are our core customers? What are our brand promises? What are the KPIs in order that we measure if we are delivering those brand promises to those core customers? What is our unfair advantage? What are our differentiating activities? And finally, then we come to the big area, audacious goal, and we start doing, okay, what is the category that we're trying to win? What will be in 10 years, next 3 years, next funding round, next year, next quarter, and let's define the OKRs and ensure that everyone is on the same page. But usually this kind of discussion is very difficult to do if you don't have a very mature leadership team, because it can be very strategic. And I think that's part of the job is also bridging that strategic mindset with execution mindset, that as a COO and CEO, you kind of have a perfect balance. And I think that's what great CEOs have. How is it to you to translate strategic discussions into operational discussions that people can understand what they need to do in order to implement the strategy?
Yeah, I think it's always challenging, because when you get a bunch of intelligent people together, you inevitably have a lot of good ideas, because you've got lots of intelligent people, and that's what intelligent people do. They come up with good ideas. The reason it's challenging is not because you can't come up with any good ideas. The challenge is, how do you whittle those down and keep the organization focused on the right ones? Right. And that's much easier said than done, because the danger is, intelligent people want to do interesting things and have lots of good ideas, and so end up going off in all sorts of directions, doing things that may well be good ideas, but they're not a good idea if they're not consistent with what everyone else is doing, and if they're removing focus from some things that really matter. So it kind of sounds a bit boring, but you need to prune a lot of these good ideas away, and say, no, people, these are the key things that we need to get done. One of the things I remember at Just Eat is, we were great believers in putting stickers on the window of a restaurant as a way to drive customer awareness and get growth. And, we had data that proved that worked. Now, putting stickers on the window of a restaurant is a really boring thing to do. And believe me, I did it hundreds of times. I remember doing it in Canada when it was minus 40 degrees outside. Wow. And, fingers almost falling off my hand in somewhere like Calgary or Edmonton or somewhere incredibly cold in Canada. So something very boring, but incredibly important, incredibly good value in terms of driving our growth. So, one of the things we often had to do at Just Eat was sort of stop people doing other things that were far more fun and interesting than that, to ensure that they were doing that. And, if you came to me with a new interesting idea, my first question would be, well, what percentage of your restaurants have stickers on the window? And if the answer was less than 90%, then you should probably do that before you go and do that other interesting thing. So I think there are equivalents to that in most companies, where you kind of know what works, you know what your playbook is. Your job is to first execute on that, and then see what else there is capacity for.
It's all about keeping the main thing. And in terms of execution, so if we have the right leadership team in place, and all layers of leadership, of course, with 450 people on at this stage, you also need to have a very strong middle management team to be able to communicate quickly from the top to the bottom, and vice versa. And if they have crystal clear what they need to do in terms of differentiation, in terms of executing the next milestones, it's all about getting it done. So what are some of the most valuable rhythms to you that you've been using along your journey to drive morale, inspiration, and focus everyone on the same page? So everyone in the tech industry is doing the typical one-on-ones, dailies, weeklies, monthlies, quarterly reviews, annual reviews, all ends. Is there any
every time period is covered? What do you do on a minutely basis? So some things that I do. I mean, I think with these things, it's not so much about having the most intellectually pure answer, or having the best idea. It's really about making a decision and sticking to it in practice, so that people get a sort of rhythm that they can plan around. So one of the things that I started doing straight away at Receipt Bank is a weekly global all hands. So 9 o'clock every morning, every Monday morning, which is somewhat masochistic because it's often not what I feel like doing at 9 a.m. on a Monday. But it is, so 9 a.m. every Monday, we do a global all hands where, which is, live on Zoom to anyone at Receipt Bank around the world. And so I will typically present for 10 minutes or so on anything that's happened the previous week, anything important coming up that people need to know about. And then we'll have some special guests. And actually one thing I'm keen to do more of is involve more customers in those sessions, because typically to date we've had internal speakers, but I think it's so important that people regularly hear from customers, which, obviously if you're in a sales role, you're doing that all the time, but it's important that people right across the business really understand the customer. So those weekly all hands meetings are one thing that I've introduced. I also do a monthly email to all staff with just, I guess, a more structured take on what's going on than you typically get in those weekly meetings. I'm a big believer. I mean, this is very common in tech, but I'm a huge believer in weekly one-on-ones with your direct reports. So I do an hour a week with mine. With more experienced people, you sometimes want to make that bi-weekly. Sometimes weekly is too much. But I think the foundation of being a great manager is really getting to know people and having that point every week that's their time when they can raise anything they want with you, and you make sure you're aligned on priorities and challenges that the person is facing. So those one-on-ones are quite foundational. We're moving. We have been doing quarterly business unit reviews, which is something I always used at Just Eat. I'm starting to get now more of a monthly cadence. So do something simpler, but do it more regularly with each of the business units. But there, I think with these things that there are no sort of pure right or wrong answers. I think it's about deciding and then sticking to it and really committing to your processes, and also I think using your processes for the purposes that they were intended. Because sometimes what happens is these things are all in the calendar and they require preparation, and people sort of prepare for the things as ends in themselves while forgetting why they're really doing it, right? So you're having a quarterly business review. Oh no, that means I've got to prepare my quarterly business review slides and put some data together for my quarterly business review, forgetting that the point of the quarterly business review is not to have a quarterly business review and have everyone say that it was a nice one. The point is to actually make some decisions. You've got a group of people in the room who are usually not together. This is the opportunity for that group to actually tackle some difficult questions and do something useful. So it's something very human, I think, is sort of to want to tick something off the list and make it happen, while forgetting why are we actually doing this thing in the first place. So that's all those sort of natural human tendencies to look out for. And it's just important in all these meetings that it doesn't become too corporate. By which I mean not candid. Corporate behavior for me is sort of thinking about process and planning and people and positions and egos and all that stuff, rather than having a really candid discussion about the actual issues. Are the people the right people? Are there competitive challenges that we're coming against that we need to really face up to? Are there lessons in the data that are apparent, and are we surfacing those lessons and really getting to the nub of what the issues are that the data is telling us? So in all these processes, management needs to be really candid and focused on the actual substance of the issues, and that requires a lot of trust between people, because you've got to really trust each other to be able to have that level of candor, and that's what it's the challenge, I think, for every CEO, is to get a group of people together between whom there is that level of trust.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, and it comes back to being a CEO is one of the most difficult jobs in the world. So you must have some of the most difficult problems to solve every single day coming to your table, and sometimes it can be, even for the most high energy, positive people, it can be very overwhelming always to have another tough problem to solve and to go through with your direct reports. So how do you keep your energy high, and how do you keep sane going through this kind of hectic growth on your journey? Yeah,
so I actually dispute that it's one of the most difficult jobs in the world. I think nurses, firefighters, soldiers, people who
it feels a very positive and growth mindset. You are answering by
these are the people who are typically, by the way, paid far less than CEOs. These are the people with the really challenging jobs, and I think it does pay for CEOs to remember that typically in these situations no one's actually going to die, no one's actually going to get hurt, and I think it is important that we all have that kind of perspective. So the way I think about all these challenges you have as CEO is to adopt the mentality of a sports team or a game of chess or whatever competitive situation you enjoy. I mean, if I'm playing chess with you, I want the game to be difficult, right? If you're just letting me take your pieces one by one, I'm going to win the game, but it would have been a really boring game. And if you put me in some really difficult position, I'm not going to go, oh my God, I can't believe what you just done. That's like the whole fun of playing chess is difficult. And of course, I really want to win, but it's challenging. And, the same is true of football or tennis or whatever you enjoy. So I think the mentality, the spirit that I try to bring to work is that sort of competitive sport. You really want to win, but you also want it to be difficult. And if it wasn't difficult, it wouldn't be fun.
Right.
And so, all the challenges that come your way, you try to have that sort of positive mentality around. And one of the great things about being the CEO, one of the privileges of being the CEO is it's really on you to bring together the group of people and the culture that enable that spirit to come alive. Because it is difficult to be positive like that if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people who are very emotional and negative and just wallow in their problems. But the great thing as CEO is you can surround yourself with people who do have that sort of positive, energetic outlook on things, and that's what ultimately makes it a fun place to work.
So let's go for one of our favorite questions in the show, and the last one, which is, if you would have the opportunity to meet Adrian, and let's go back to the beginning of Just Eat, because you have been with Receipt Bank for how long now?
Only 9 months.
So
yeah.
let's do it a little bit longer. So what advice would you offer to Adrian at that time?
I would say be very open to taking risks. I mean, you're younger. The younger you are, in a sense, the more risks you can take, because the older you get, you acquire potentially you acquire assets and children potentially. You just inherently have more to lose. And you've got less and less time left, I guess, every day. Whereas when you're young, you've got nothing to lose, and you've got a lot of time. You've got hopefully a long life ahead of you. So I would say, you're in a great position to take risks when you're younger, and generally when I've been bold and taken risks, like when I left a consulting job to join Ask Jeeves after the dot-com bubble had burst. That was a pretty big risk, and people in the consulting firm I left were like, "You're crazy! What the hell are you doing?" And likewise, when I left Google to join Spotify, people at Google thought I was crazy. When I left Spotify to join Just Eat, people at Spotify thought I was really crazy to be leaving this music business to go and sell takeaway. So every time I've taken a risk, it's paid off, and it's been a good thing. And I would say to my younger self, just do more of that. Like be more willing to take risks, and what's the worst that can happen.
What an amazing way of closing the show. Adrian, thank you so much for making the time to share your experience with the community.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
And to our community, thanks for being on that side. Keep us updated about what serves you the best, and we will keep bringing you the best lessons of the best tech leaders in the world to help you scale from 2 million to 100 million ARR. Keep scaling, and see you soon.